Hello and welcome to this week's Face the State. I'm Tim McGonigal. About every 5 years, the Catholic bishops of the world travel to Rome to meet with the Pope for what is called Ad Limina Apostolorum, which translates to the threshold of the apostles. Bishops from the Northwest have just returned from Italy, including Montana's two bishops, and they are joining us here today. To my right is Bishop Michael Warfel, the 8th bishop of the Diocese of Great Falls Billings, and to his right is Bishop Austin Vetter, brand new as the 11th bishop of the Diocese of Helena, joining us today to talk about the trip. Thank you so much both for taking time to talk today.
Great to be here with you.
All right.
Very much so. And today's actually my third month anniversary.
Third month. Well, congratulations and welcome to Montana. All right.
Thank you.
Well, as Catholic bishops, I know you have a special relationship with the Pope. So both of you, tell us about that relationship. We'll start with Bishop Vetter.
Well, when I was sitting in the audience hall with the 16 bishops and the Pope, and he told us, just speak freely, and we had 2.5 hours with him. As he started speaking, I was reminded of the gospel when Jesus tells Peter, the shepherd will be struck and the sheep will be scattered, but then when you're strengthened, you have to strengthen the brothers. And as I was sitting there, that's what Peter's been doing for over 2,000 years, that Francis is the successor of St. Peter, 264 different names. Now Peter goes by Francis, but he was there to encourage the successors of the apostles, which was just very, very encouraging. Even though I was just starting out, I just felt very encouraged by him and excited to get started as a new bishop of the Diocese of Helena.
All right. Bishop Warfel, what are your
impressions?
I've
had the pleasure of actually meeting with a number of the previous popes. It was my 4th visit on the Ad Limina Apostolorum. But I think Pope Francis in our meeting summed it up. It's important to have fraternity among the bishops. He is the Bishop of Rome, as well as the Vicar of Christ and the successor of Peter. But he has taken I think a page out of Pope John Paul II, had a very great desire to have relationships with bishops around the world. And Pope Francis is really up the ante, so to speak. We met with him for 2.5 hours. And my previous visits with the popes, with Benedict, it was like 30 minutes, and with a couple with John Paul II, it was like 15 minutes, which we're very glad to have. But 2.5 hours just to talk about whatever you wanted to talk about was incredible.
All right. Well, Bishop Warfel, if my math is correct, you've been a bishop for almost 25 years.
Well, 23.
23? Well,
yeah.
I guess that's almost 25. But you have met, you said, with Pope John Paul II, you've met with Pope Benedict, now Pope Francis, and there is differences. What would you say are the big differences between those popes?
Well, I'd say the John Paul II was certainly an intellectual. And of course, he had the experience of both life under the Nazis and under the communists, and I think which very colored his priesthood and his pontificate. And he had a real concern for people who experienced injustice and oppression. Benedict, I think, was very much of an academic, intellectual, and you can see that all the writings that he had. He had worked in the Curia and the Congregation for the Doctrine of the Faith, dealing with moral issues in the Church. Francis is, I think of him more in terms of a pastoral bishop, pope, and really dealing with concerns that are how I would say it. He wants to have a more synodal approach to life, not so much a centralized approach to the Church, but really asking for the local regions of the world, the Catholic Church, to really make some really significant decisions on their own.
Okay. Bishop Vetter, I understand you spent a lot of time in Rome in your ministry with the North American College for Seminarians, but this was your first visit with Pope Francis as a bishop. So what was it like for you, and is there any special training for new bishops such as yourself?
There's not. They don't give you buckets, pails full of money, or a manual to tell you what to do when you show up. I told someone asked me when I was newly ordained, I said, well, I suppose it feels like it does for new parents when the doctor and the nurses give you their give you the baby, and you say, so that's it? I just go home? Like, are the police going to come and check on me in 2 months to make sure I'm doing this right? Or, no, here's your baby, and good luck. We'll see you when you give them their shots. And it feels very similar, you know, that I'm just starting new and just to learn with people and to listen to them and to find out what their concerns are, how I can serve them. But to go back to Rome, I was at the North American College as the head spiritual director for 6 years. Okay. And to go back, I was able to be the main celebrant, and to preach a homily for the seminary community. And it was very touching to me. I told them all I was more nervous for that Mass than I was at all 6 years that I was there. And part of it was they were all paying much better attention now that I was a bishop, but also just seeing their faces of, here's one of their teachers, one of their priests that formed them, who's now a bishop. And it was a very unique experience for me. So it was nice to go back. But when you go back as a bishop, it's amazing what a ring and a pectoral cross will do. They treat you a little differently as you come in to the Vatican, and that it's ours, you know, and that they really treat us that way.
All right.
This is really better than a credit card.
Bishop Vetter, I know on your weekly video message to people in the diocese, you were talking about preparing for this trip to Rome, and you talked about some of the issues that you were hoping to discuss with Pope Francis. What were those topics? And
yeah, that's great. That's a great question. You know, what was very interesting is when I got in there and I look around, and not only to see the Pope, but also bishops who have obviously a lot more experience than I do. I was wise for once in my life, and I didn't say a thing. So it was a little easier once you sit there and say, I have nothing to say. I've been a bishop for 2 months. It was the most touching time for me. I got to introduce my 2 nephews who are studying to be priests at the North American College from the Diocese of Bismarck, where I came from. And so they came along to the audience, and so they got to meet the Pope. And I told them, these are my nephews. And the Pope looked at me quizzically, and he said, nepotism's a sin. And I said, Holy Father, I'm in the Diocese of Helena, so I'm not going to be their bishop. He said, okay, then that's not a sin. But he said, you're so young. And I said, well, you named me. You picked me. And we just had a delightful exchange. And at the end, I asked him to pray for me as I get started. And he took me by both hands, and he said, and he looked me right in the eye, and he said, you pray for me too. He said in English. And it was a very fatherly exchange, as here I am just starting out, and here he is at the twilight of his time, just giving me that encouragement. It meant a great deal.
You know, I would like to add on to that, the prayer part. I've had, this is the second time I've met Francis, and I know from others that he regularly asks people to keep him in prayer. And he's very sincere about that. It's not just something he should say. He's very concerned that people remember him.
All right. Bishop Werfel, were there any issues or concerns facing your diocese that you were able to speak with him about, address with him?
Well, you know, I did, in the conversation we had, he did ask that we keep things in the room, although I know from reading other reports that hasn't necessarily been respected. Given the one question I asked him, given that he commissioned a group of 12 theologians a couple of years ago to study whether the history of diaconate for women in the Catholic Church, I asked him what was the state of that question, because there was some reporting that he would recommit or recommission another group of people. So I asked him just where was that at, and he just kind of, in a general way, just talked about it, and with no commitment to that.
Okay. Now, at this particular visit, there was both you bishops and also bishops from throughout the Northwest. So I'm curious to see how would you say the Catholic Church here in the West, Northwest, Mountain West, differs from, say, the Midwest or even the East Coast?
I found it very encouraging, just the great knowledge, not only that the Holy Father had of our region, but also all of his curial positions. When we met during the whole week, we had meetings all week, full days with all his different offices that serve the Universal Church. And I was very much encouraged. We had to send a report over. I wasn't even a bishop yet, but it's called a quinquennial report, a 5-year report. You know, Latin words always sound like it's a more important document, but it's just a 5-year report doesn't sound as impressive as a quinquennial report. But those were all sent over there to all those offices, and then they were all dispersed, and they read it, you could tell, and they knew. And those reports are quite substantial. It tells them everything. Sacramental life, numbers of people coming to Mass, weddings, divorces, funerals, vocations, everything, really, in the life of the diocese. And so they had a chance to digest all that before we came. And they knew a lot about us and remembered it. You know, they studied up and really wanted to be of help. That's what it's for. We go over for 2 reasons. One, the main reason is a pilgrimage, to go and pray at the tombs of Peter and Paul. That's where they're buried, and to make that sacred journey. And then to be encouraged by the Pope and to make an account of our stewardship, how we've been taking care of what's been entrusted to us in this particular part of the vineyard of our Lord. So that his knowledge, the fact that we're quite secular, you know, there's the Catholic faith, even though populations are growing, the Catholic numbers are not growing. And not only Catholic numbers, but religious affiliation is not growing. I don't know, they call them the nones, but that it is quite secular where our churches are.
Yeah, and I know you spent considerable time with the other Northwest bishops, in addition to meeting with the Pope, but I know you guys, I think you had a retreat with the other bishops. And
That was in Siena.
In Siena, yeah. Tell us about what you took away from that.
Well, the retreat director is Father Paul Murray, who was a spiritual director at the Athenaeum, I believe.
Yep,
Yeah, and
Angelicum.
Angelicum.
Yep.
And so in authority of St. Catherine of Siena, and we stayed right there at the sanctuary area, and we had daily Mass at the chapel with St. Catherine. And it just provided, facilitated just a wonderful experience, spiritual experience, really looking at our own relationship with the Lord, you know, and how we live our faith. And it's a pretty basic retreat, but one of the lovely things about being in Siena is that the persons who organized it had us going to a different Italian restaurant every night.
Yeah, well, hey.
So it was about a 5-pound retreat.
For me, I would echo what Bishop Warfel said, but for me in a very special way, being new, I didn't know most of the bishops, and so it was a great opportunity for me to get to know them, and for them to get to know me, for better or worse.
Yeah.
And so that was really a delightful thing for me.
In fact, it was
fraternity.
the 2 of us will be working together closely, and it gave us 2 weeks to be together to really get to know each other.
Yeah.
So that was a real blessing.
That's great. Well, on another topic, each of the 2 dioceses in Montana have gone through federal Chapter 11 bankruptcy in the past couple of years. Talk about, Bishop Warfel, I guess we'll start with you, what that process has been like and how the diocese has recovered and moved forward.
Well, we first had a suit. The first lawsuit was, now 7.5 years ago. And for about 5.5 years of that, it was just kind of waiting because for them, the attorneys, to finish with the bankruptcy in Helena, you know, and then because of the circumstances, we judged it was necessary to file for Chapter 11 bankruptcy or reorganization. That was a year. We went through, made the settlement, and then that was January. It was finalized January 3rd last year. And now the past year has been just a wonderful time of trying to regroup and renew. And it's nice not to have to deal with those kind of legal issues. You know, we have not forgotten about those who were victims.
Sure.
You know, and that's a really important thing that we never forget that, because I met with victims, a number of victims personally, so I know their stories and I know the pain that they still carry. So that's a really important part of this. It's not a matter of just getting through the legal and the financial stuff. It's a matter of dealing with people who were hurt very seriously and harmed, and making sure that we do everything we can that it never happen again.
All right. Bishop Fredder, even though the bankruptcy process was well in motion by the time you took over, how has the Helena Diocese responded and moved forward?
You know, it's the people and the diocese have been wonderful to me. I told them, it's an abomination. It's an abomination what happened to these children, the most vulnerable. It's just, there's no excuse, nothing. And we have to do better. And the least we could do, is give them our money. I mean, that's not the most. And to have to go bankrupt, I told the people when I went around to the deaneries, I said, we went bankrupt, so we lost our money. But we're not bankrupt in our faith. We didn't lose our faith. We're not bankrupt. And I really believe that there's going to be a new springtime in the whole state of Montana. I told them when I was in Conrad, I said, I grew up on a farm. I said, we can learn from farmers. I said, there's a few things we can learn. One is, if there's a farmer 1 year is just planting the same crop in the field year after year after year, another farmer would look at it and say, you can't do that. You got to rotate your crops. You got to use fertilizer. You're just going to ruin the land. A non-farmer might think, well, that's fine. Everything seems fine. Then, if that farmer 1 year doesn't plant anything, lets the ground lay fallow, puts some manure on it, right? Lets it rest, the non-farmer looks and says, what is he doing? I'm not going to make any money. But the other farmer looks and nods and says, he's going to have the best crop on that field next year, right? He's going to have a bumper crop. In a very real way, during these years, for both of us, the ground has been laying fallow, and they've dumped manure on it, our own manure. And to a non-believer, you might think, well, this is going to be the end. But not for a believer. Now, when the warmth of the Holy Spirit touches those seeds of faith, you watch it grow. There's going to be a whole new springtime. I believe that with every fiber in me. That, yes, it's difficult. It's a shame in the strongest sense of the word. But the cross from suffering, we believe, bears fruit in our faith. That we can't go around it. That we embrace it and we become more transparent so that we can gain back the trust. That's what's so awful. We have to gain back the trust. Trust is essential for belief. If you can't trust us, it's detrimental to the faith, because that's the one element that's essential. Is in order to say I have faith, I have to trust that what's been handed on through tradition, through the life of the church, is true.
All right. Well, I know there's two dioceses in Montana. There's the Great Falls Billings Diocese and the Helena Diocese, and they both encompass very large areas. How big of an area is the Great Falls Diocese,
Great Falls Billings
speaking?
is just under 95,000 square miles. Okay. I don't know the exact figures right, but it's just under 95,000. It's 2/3 of eastern Montana.
How many parishes does that encompass?
We actually have 50 parishes, but 50 missions churches associated with each parish. And many of them are very small, rural, which is pretty typical of all of eastern Montana, with the exception of a few towns like Billings and Great Falls.
And I know you make an effort to get to as many of those as possible, right?
I am on the road a lot,
Yeah.
but when I do so, I try to hit 4 or 5 parishes or arrange for a number of events, so that when I'm on the road, it makes it more efficient for the travel, because it's a lot of wear and tear, not only on the vehicle but on the body.
Yeah. Bishop Vetter, how about the Diocese of Helena? What's the area for that?
51,922 square miles.
Wow.
That's not fair,
That's pretty impressive.
I had to. They've been asking me, so I figured I better figure this out.
You know about how many parishes you have
in the 50s as well, and same with that, it's what I've been doing, same thing, there's a lot of driving, and I don't know my way around. I'm from Bismarck originally, but it's 9.5 hours from Helena, so it takes a little while to get used to a new place. But what I've been doing, the nuncio, when he left me after I was ordained, Archbishop Pierre, the Pope's representative to the United States, he said to me, Austin, don't get caught in the chancery. Don't get caught behind a desk. You're a missionary bishop, and you're a missionary diocese. So I nodded my head, and so I went to the chancery, and I've been telling everyone, so we're a missionary. And they all nod. I said, do any of you know what that means? And they all kind of look at me and said, because I don't. I said, I'm much better at maintaining. we're maintainers. We maintain it, right? Let's not lose what we have. And Pope Francis, that's been a big message of his, to get out, right? To be missionary, to evangelize by sharing our lives, and to get back to more basic things. And that's what I've been trying to do. So what I'm doing now is I spend a week in the Chancery, because I have to do some paperwork and those sorts of things. And then I spend a week out. I go to different regions, and I stay a whole week and visit the hospitals, the nursing homes, the prisons, the schools, the parishes, just trying to get to know them and letting them get to know me, and finding creative ways. People aren't going to knock on my door in the Chancery and say, Bishop, I'd like to learn more about the Catholic faith. Tell me about what you believe. I got to find creative ways to meet people. So wherever they want to meet, I'm more than happy to do it.
All right. Well, it is a political year. That can be a good thing or a bad thing, I guess. But what role would you say bishops in the U.S. and here in Montana might have on the political front? Bishop Warfel, we'll start with you.
Well, obviously, well, maybe not so much obviously, you know, we're going to be involved in political issues, but as more so dealing with moral issues as opposed, and definitely not partisan issues.
Sure.
You know, sometimes those things happen, they slip through, and then you have to deal with it. You know, you have a pastor that has his own particular political bent, and then the bishop needs to talk with them, and we have interviews like people like you.
That's right.
But, yeah. And, but we certainly want to address issues. You know, whether we're dealing with something like human trafficking, or certainly a key issue for us as Catholics is abortion. You know, capital punishment remains an issue for us, assisted suicide. Those are some of those life issues, but there's also issues like dealing with there's some 70 million refugees in the world, and dealing with immigration. It's not so much an issue right here in Montana, but certainly it is for our country. You know, so it's a matter of what is our take on it from a moral perspective on a particular issue, and then to talk about it.
Okay. Bishop Vetter, when you were with the Pope, did he bring up any political issues, or was there any talk of that?
No. It's, you know, the thing is, by political, if by political we mean the right ordering of society, or living together in a community, then of course we have to be completely involved in that, because community building, living in a community, that's the life of the church, it's the life of society. And so seeing that we're in this together, we're all part of the human family, and all of us, not just the Catholic Church or someone in a political party, but every human should be intimately involved in the right ordering of society to make it a better place for us to live, looking out for those who are forgotten, who are less fortunate than we are, looking out for one another in creative new ways. And so we do need to be, if by political we mean that, absolutely we're involved in it. But like you said, not being partisan, not, you know, I was asked once about this whole thing. I said, to be honest, in the Catholic Church, the fullness of what she teaches, it's more liberal than liberals and more conservative than conservatives. It's way more than what we would think politically in the United States. That we're looking on all spectrums in society, and not just this society. And remember that the Catholic Church is 1.1 billion Catholics around the world, and so it needs to be involved in building society that is a healthy society for us.
All right. Bishop Vetter, I know in one of your video messages you talked about your desire to connect with young people, and I'm just curious, what is your thoughts on the state of Catholic education in Montana in the short time that you've been here?
I visited the schools. I did something a little more creative, I guess. I was in one of the schools in Missoula, one of our Catholic schools, and I went to the creative writing course, and there were 16 students in there, and I gave them a homework assignment. I said, write me a Christmas homily. And they kind of looked at me, and I said, I'm serious, write me a Christmas homily. And they said, are you going to use it? I said, if it's any good. I said, if not, I'm just going to throw it away. I said, I throw away half of my homilies. I probably should throw away more of my homilies, but I give them. They took it very seriously, and the teacher was just amazed. She said, they worked for 3 days. That's all they were talking about, how to explain to a 16-year-old the birth of Jesus and what that means. What difference does that make? that Jesus was really born in history and that we believe that he's God. What's that mean? That God became a human. It was fascinating. I used half of their homily. And afterwards, an elderly man came up to me at the cathedral and he said, "Bishop, I think that's the best Christmas homily I've heard." Wow. And a 16-year-old said to me, "That's the first one I listened to in a while." Right? But it was amazing. And I told them all, I said, think of it. How many of us spend 3 days really wrestling with the mysteries of our faith? How would I explain it to a neighbor, to a friend, to a coworker, to an enemy? Right? Sure. And so I gave them all the assignment. I said, so all of you, I give you an assignment. You go home and you write a homily. How would you explain this mystery? I'll bet you these kids, they won't forget it for a while. And who knows, when they're 80 years old, they still may remember saying, I spent a lot of time thinking about Christmas. So I'm trying to engage them where they're at and to see that they're not just the future. They're now. Yeah. We need them. If the church doesn't have crying babies and a bunch of, a bunch of stuff, it's dead. It's dead. That we need life. The Pope Francis just had a synod, a whole gathering of the bishops and experts and families and young people from all around the world for a whole month, and wrote a document about young people. And the title of it is Christ is Alive. You want something interesting to read that. You can pull it up on the internet. It's amazing. And he said, Christ is alive, especially in the young, because they're so alive.
Bishop Warfel, in the Diocese of Great Falls Billings, how would you say Catholic education is faring?
I think it's doing very well. In a similar way to Bishop Austin, the last week of January is Catholic Schools Week. Right. And I always make a point of celebrating Mass and visiting all the Catholic schools in the diocese. We have a combination of 16, so it's a lot of driving that week. But we combine some of them together. But I experienced a lot of faith and energy in the young people, such as here in Great Falls we have the 2 elementary, middle school plus the high school here, and so I had we brought them all together for the Mass there. So I experienced a lot of faith, and that like a lot of young people, they're going to be looking at different things in their life and having questions and stuff. But it's a good environment for them to really look at their faith.
Yeah, I know you got to be proud of the Great Falls Central speech and debate team, which just took the state title.
Well, of course.
Ironically, they took it from a team that Missoula Loyola, who had won it for 36 years or something.
What are you doing?
We're
you didn't ask for permission. You didn't ask for permission. The other thing I want to say about Catholic education, Carroll College. Sure. We're so fortunate to have Carroll College. I'm the chancellor of Carroll College, and I visited there after I was announced, and they gave me a tour, and I was just so impressed. The friendliness of the student body, how engaged they were, how excited. They had a vigil the night of my ordination, stayed up all night praying for me. I had Mass with them, full chapel. It's so encouraging.
All right. Well, we are out of time, and we want to thank Bishop Michael Warfel, Diocese of Great Falls Billings, Bishop Austin Vetter of the Diocese of Helena for taking time today. And we want to thank you for joining us on this week's edition of Face the State.
You've been watching Face the State, a presentation of MTN, the Montana Television Network.